Welcome, everyone. Please either take a seat or get a refreshment and then take a seat. Are we ready to go back there? We're good. Okay. Welcome. I'm Alan Dodds Frank from the Overseas Press Club in New York, and in conjunction with the Ford Foundation, we've been putting on panels about various issues in journalism around the world, in Paris, London, New York, of course, and other places. And we're thrilled to be here in Pittsburgh with the co-sponsorship of Carnegie Mellon University, obviously, putting on the Ritz for us, so we really appreciate it. So we're going to have not one but two panels, as I think you all may know. But given the length of them and the fact that we're webcasting live, we're going to try to stay on schedule. But you are welcome to refreshments at any time. And so you can move in and out of the room. We're going to be pretty informal. I think we have two really distinguished panels. Really glad you're all here. The first will be moderated by the managing editor of the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. I'm really happy he's here, Jim Cuddy Jr., and he'll take care of the rest of the panel. We will have some debate among the panel. They'll question each other for a little while, and then we will throw it open to questions from you all and from anybody who might be watching the webcast. Jim, take it away.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is FBI Special Agent Keith Mularski. Keith.
I'll be the card girl.
Keith is the Supervisory Special Agent assigned to the Cyber Division of the FBI. Keith received his appointment to the position of the FBI in 1998. He's a Duquesne University graduate. He was in the Washington field office where he investigated national security matters for 7 years. During this time, he worked on a number of high-profile investigations, such as the Robert Hanssen espionage investigation and the 9/11 terrorist attack on the Pentagon. In 2005, Keith transferred to the FBI's Cyber Division and is now detailed to the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance in Pittsburgh. The NCFTA is a joint partnership between law enforcement, academia, and industry, which seeks to maximize overlapping public-private resource synergies, creating a dynamic cyber nerve center for tactical and proactive responses to cybercrime. Did I get that?
You didn't have to read all that.
Our second panelist is Nicholas Christian, is an assistant research professor with the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and Scilab. He was previously the associate director of the Information Networking Institute. He started at Carnegie Mellon as a resident faculty in the Research and Education Center in Japan. He holds a master's and a PhD in computer science from the University of Virginia. Our third panelist, Andrew Conti, is an investigative reporter for the Tribune Review. He has covered organ transplants, casino gambling, and Pittsburgh City Hall. For a story on offshore banking, he opened an account with Trib Money in Belize, which he supposedly closed. He has won numerous national and state awards for his writing, including Scripps Howard Foundation Award, the Carnegie Science Award, and honors from the Inland Press Association and the Association of Healthcare Journalists. Is that enough, Andy? Thank you, buddy. Okay. Why don't we start with Agent Mularski and tell us a little bit about his work. And
Sure. Well, I supervise the cyber squad here in Pittsburgh. So we're responsible for investigating any kind of computer intrusions that affect the Western District of Pennsylvania and also through West Virginia. We both investigate national security intrusions and also criminal intrusions. One of the things that the FBI has done differently in the last year and a half is is that we used to investigate from our cyber squad also online fraud and things like that, but we've moved those violations into our normal criminal investigative division because those are common criminal crimes now, and we're investigating the most serious, egregious computer intrusions and botnets and theft of intellectual properties.
Okay. So, are we safe?
Are we safe? Well, I mean, the thing with the internet, as a lot of people know, is I don't think that there's a thing as a safe computer. You know, at any time that you go onto Google, every day you're seeing a new vulnerability, a new company being hacked. Really, the only safe computer is one that's turned off and unplugged from the internet, and even then, you're probably not 100% safe. You know, but at the same time, you know, the internet has changed our way of life. If you think back 10 years ago, or even just 5 years ago where we were, now everybody has you know, a mobile device, everybody has a tablet, they do their online banking, they do their online shopping, and you know, from that standpoint, it has changed our life. Do I do all my banking and you know, and shopping online? Absolutely. I think that you're just as safe doing it online as you would be walking into a brick and mortar where you could actually get physically robbed. There are a lot of protections out there for people, you know, purchasing things online where you're always made whole. So from that standpoint, yeah, I think we are safe and all that. But at the same time, you're always still vulnerable to different types of hacks. And so from that, you have to practice good security.
Okay. Professor Christian, are we safe?
If I say yes, I'm losing my job. So the answer is it's more nuanced, as Agent Malorski was mentioning. So I want to perhaps go a little bit on some sort of history of cybercrime in general and echo one of the points that you were making. Online crime is a very new thing. If you think about it, 25 years ago, what was online crime? How many of you have seen the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick? Quite a few from our generation and previous generations. The students in the back were unborn, so they don't know about it. But that was the model of the hacker, right? I mean, that was, you know, the whiz kid that was trying to break into machines, mostly for prestige, mostly for, essentially for bragging rights. And the situation is very different today. I would say that there's perhaps 4 generic type of attackers that you can think of. Nation states, God have mercy on your soul if they're after you. Financially motivated crooks, which is probably what you have to deal with quite a lot, actually. And those people are motivated mostly by money. Hackers of the same type of whiz kids, but they are not necessarily that problematic. They are not the most egregious ones. And things like the Syrian Electronic Army, which are the digital equivalent of people, you know, tagging graffiti on your walls. And of those, the financially motivated ones are actually the ones that we waste a lot of resources on tracking and trying to find, because essentially they're just trying to monetize their activities. They don't necessarily care about you. They care about the fact that your machine is a resource and that they can steal stuff from it, or that they can turn it into something that they can monetize, a computer that can be used by others. And so those are actually the major nuisance that we have to deal with. Agent Malorski was talking about botnets, he was talking about vulnerabilities. Those are in general used by people who have a financial agenda. And that's where a lot of the research that we're doing here is actually focusing on, is trying to find ways, technological ways, to disrupt their monetary profits, because that's really how you hit at them. If you patch vulnerabilities, like you said, they'll find another one. If you find a way of disrupting the way they're monetizing their business, then maybe you have a shot at actually stopping some of them from continuing what they're doing.
And if I could just add on that too, you had talked about crime bit with espionage too. You know, when you think of espionage, you may think of like a TV show like The Americans, and you're thinking about an agent and you go meet in like a park, or you have a dead drop, or you secret writing. But really espionage in the 21st century is totally different. And and it's an email that comes in that has a malicious attachment that they get into your networks, and they can steal, gigabytes of data within 20 minutes. They can steal your whole research and development that you just spent the last 20 years of your company, and it can be gone. And I think there was a figure I saw last year that espionage actors stole over 4 times the volume of documents that are housed at the Library of Congress. So it's an epic proportions right now from an espionage standpoint too.
Okay. Andy, since you write about this quite a bit, should I be more afraid of hackers who have an agenda, a government agenda, or should I be afraid of the person with the monetary agenda?
Right, that's a great question. Who should we be afraid of, right? I mean, first of all, one of the things I like to point out, especially on a panel like this with genuine experts who know about computers and so many people in the audience who I've turned to as sources, actually. I'm not a computer expert, but what got my attention on this, I mean, I know how to use a computer, right? But I don't really know what's going on underneath the hood. But when I talk to the experts who should know what's going on, a lot of them seem genuinely freaked out. They were really concerned about this. And Jim makes a good point that, I mean, on one hand, there's a lot of fear about after Stuxnet and what it was able to do with the Iranian nuclear centrifuges. There was a virus that goes in and attacks the nuclear program in Iran without any kind of kinetic attack, no military attack. You're able to go in, somebody, presumably the United States, but nobody's taken any credit for it, is able to go in and shut down their nuclear program. So that's significant. But then as soon as that happened, the fear was somebody would turn that back against us, back at the United States. And what would that mean here? At the same time, we've heard so much over the last year, especially about government surveillance. And you think about so much discussion of the NSA and listening to our phone calls and reading our emails. But at the same time, if you look at what we do as consumers, we share all kinds of information, our most intimate details. We just did a story recently looking at people who wear the biometric devices. It's like a bracelet you wear or an armband, and it tracks when you go to sleep, when you wake up, how many times you're awake in the middle of the night, your heart rate, what you eat in some cases, what you do, how you're feeling. And that's information that people who wear those often just give away freely. And so, some people would say, what's the big deal? Who cares? But when the experts I've talked to say, information is power. And so I think it is a question of being concerned about the government, but also being aware of what we're giving away.
And I think a lot of it it's convenience. Like we were talking earlier, the internet was set up not to be secure. It was set up to be convenient, to make our lives easier. So what we're trying to do now is be secure on a thing that was set up never intended to be that way. We want to do we're in a society right now where we want everything instantaneous. And if you want to be secure, it takes time. You have to encrypt things, you have to use anonymizers, and you can't get the things that you want. So it's kind of a paradox on, do you want to use the internet for the convenience that it was intended for, or do you want to be secure?
Right. So, I mean, if you think about the buyer rewards programs that are out there, everyone who goes to Giant Eagle, you have your Fuel Perks card. And I was freaked out. I went online, right, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. They have a record of everything I've ever purchased. Of course they do, right? But at the same time, it's that once I saw that, then I found out I could also get my groceries. They would do all the shopping for me. So I get curbside pickup, and every week they send me a list that say, here's what you bought last week. Do you want to buy the same things again? And so I love the convenience. At the same time, freaked out a little bit about how much they know about me. It's our cool but creepy future, right?
I just want to go back to one thing that you were saying about Stuxnet. The interesting thing about Stuxnet, and that's going to make you even more scared perhaps, is that it actually failed. That's why we know that there was a Stuxnet. It's because that worm that was supposed to be contained to a certain type of hardware, there was a small problem, I guess, in its development, and it actually escaped, and people were able to actually figure out that this was going on. What about, the things that you don't know about? So now that you're scared, let me try to reassure you. These are not going to be used on individuals unless you're a target of very high importance. I mean, if you're, in the top echelon of a terrorist group, then yes, I mean, that's the type of thing that people would perhaps try to actually get at you. But if you're a random person, it's just too much. I mean, the resources to develop these kind of things are just too high. They are not doing that. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about different types of surveillance and data collection, which is essentially generalized to everybody, either by corporations or by governments for completely different aspects. But that's a very, very different thing than talking about things like Stuxnet, which are very targeted, which are essentially the equivalent of military strikes on targets of high importance.
Can I jump in with a question? How concerned should we be about a Stuxnet type attack on our infrastructure in the United States, either banking infrastructure or our energy grid, transportation grid? I hear a lot of talk about that. How serious, how much does that worry
I mean,
you
I
guys?
think from the FBI perspective in the U.S. government, that's our cyber 9/11. That's the thing that we're all scared about out there. And as a result, we throw a lot of resources into that. The big thing is with cyber, it takes a whole collective approach. It's not just a one agency solution. We constantly have outreach to the different communities, to the different researchers, to the different academia and industry in order to find out really what's out there to try to prevent that. But that is the big fear, for sure.
Well, if I can just add to that, I mean, it's a valid concern. I think that when you're looking at things like power plants, dams, nuclear plants, there is this sort of culture that if we have good physical security, essentially people with guns in front of them, we are probably fine. However, one thing that we notice more and more, and for instance, the recent episode with Target demonstrates that very, very easily, you need to also be careful with how you're organizing your network and what you're connecting to what, because it is very possible that somebody who doesn't even have physical access to your resources may be able to get into them. This is exactly what happened, apparently. I mean, we don't know everything yet, but there is a very strong suspicion that this is what happened with Target. So Target is not critical infrastructure, but it's still a really big annoyance to have a major retailer have a bunch of credit cards stolen.
See, I told you guys, the more you listen to them, the more you start to freak out, right? Real
don't
concern
freak
about
out.
this stuff.
But I want to keep my job.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. What's that?
May I ask one question here? What about attacks on journalism? I mean, I know that the New York Times editor said just the other day that she was quite alarmed when the publisher informed her that she thought he believed their newspaper was under attack by the Chinese government units. And we had the Turkish prime minister try to shut down Twitter. So the question is, both from corporations and governments, are we in danger of having the free flow of information disrupted, curtailed, corrupted? Keith, why don't you start?
Well, it all depends. I mean, anybody's a victim. I mean, anybody could be a potential victim. If somebody wants information, whether it be a journalist or another company, if somebody decides, hey, I really want that information, they're going to do everything they can to get that. And it's not like physically where in the old days, if I wanted the information that you had and you had it in your office, I had to walk in or get somebody to give that to me. I could send you an email and with a malicious attachment, and maybe you don't open it that first day. So maybe tomorrow I send 10 emails from different people, and maybe you don't open that. And then the next day, I send 30 emails from other people to try to get you, or I try to get the compromise one of your friends to send the email. It's very, there's no ramifications of the person sending that stuff. It's very, very simple, and if they don't succeed, they just try again. Whereas going in physically, it's a lot more difficult. So it's a softer target. So if you have information that somebody wants, whether it be a nation state or a hacker, and they want to do everything they can to get that information, it's going to be very difficult to stop them. With vulnerabilities in software, with zero-day vulnerabilities that aren't patched. So the bad guys know that this isn't patched, but you don't know, and there's no patch for it. So you can't do anything to protect your computer. You visit a website, you're infected, you're exploited. So there's no way of preventing that except, like I said, to turn your computer off. But that's not the solution. So.
But I think, Alan, what you're ultimately talking about is the balance of information, right? As a journalist, on one hand, there's the concern that there is a valid concern that if somebody's emailing you information, or I know we talked earlier about secret documents. Say somebody wants to get you secret documents. How are they going to do that in a way that doesn't leave a trail, a footprint that can be tracked? And you can do that. There's I was just looking today on the Onion Router, or Tor as it's known now, the hidden internet. And on there, the New Yorker has a Dropbox where anybody can go on and secretly drop documents to them, and they can access the documents. But on the other side of the scale, Alan, you have to consider the free flow of information. Your overarching question was, what does the internet do for the flow of information? And as a journalist, you really have to err on the side of having so much more information now. The internet, connects us to, what's happening all around the world at any moment. When we did our story about the Onion Router, I call it the Onion Router. Tor is sort of an acronym for the Onion Router. It's this hidden internet. It's a way to access the internet and appear as if you're from a different internet protocol. I should ask. The experts are here in the audience anyway. But my point is that when we did the story about it, we looked at protesters in Egypt and how they were using Tor to mask themselves. That is, the government there shut down Twitter and Facebook and all the other different ways of communicating. Folks there were quickly getting up on Tor and using that as a way to stay in touch with each other and evade the government censors. And so I think when you put those two sides of the scale, you feel the weight of all that additional information as a positive.
I agree, and I want to build up on what you were just saying. We were talking about Turkey a little bit earlier. In the past 48 hours, the number of Tor users in Turkey has grown by 10,000 at least, maybe even more. I haven't checked the numbers in the past couple of hours. Why? Well, Prime Minister Erdogan has done more for information security education in Turkey than all of us combined in the past few years. They banned Twitter. So the first thing that they did was to essentially ban the website twitter.com. Okay, so the way it works on the internet is that you typically connect to a server called the DNS server, which is kind of like a phone book. And it's mapping twitter.com to a set of digits, an address, kind of like a phone number, if you will, that is going to tell your computer how to get there. So essentially what they did in Turkey is the first thing that they did was to change the entries in that phone book to redirect you to a page that says, do not go on Twitter, it's very bad, they're saying bad things about us. So what do? Well, you change the phone book, right? So you go to a different DNS server, and that took basically people approximately 30 seconds to figure out how to do that. There was even that great picture we were talking about graffiti earlier, there was a tag saying DNS 8888 on some wall somewhere in Istanbul so that people could access Twitter. So now what they've done is that they've actually blocked the IP address, that phone number equivalent to Twitter, from Turkey. So what do? Well, you don't connect to Twitter, you connect to somebody who connects to Twitter for you. And that's one of the things that Tor actually allows you to do. So right now, there's a bunch of people that are posting on Twitter. They're all coming from Tor nodes. And in Turkey, they're all coming from Tor nodes. So essentially, one thing that is interesting is that censorship has never been as challenging as it is now. If you want to censor people, it's really, really hard to do because we've got very good censorship resilient tools. At the same time, in parallel to that, you've got massive data collection, both from government and from corporations. But this is the world we live in. Terabytes are very, very cheap.
So what trends do you see? Down the road, 5 years from now?
I think what we're seeing really from an FBI perspective right now, we're seeing the explosion in the mobile platform. What we're seeing right now on the mobile platform is equivalent to what we saw on the desktop platform back in 2004. With different types of spam and SMS spam now with that. So we're really seeing that, the cybercrime move into that platform and more away from the desktop environment. That's one of the biggest trends that I would say that we're going to see from a criminal perspective. The other thing is, like what was mentioned earlier, this isn't just a pimply kid in the basement hacking, to try to hack into the Pentagon. We're really seeing organized cyber groups, and this is really organized crime on a scale that you just wouldn't imagine. Where we're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars in loss. Very sophisticated groups, and many different groups just inside one bigger group too. So we're really seeing it explode from that standpoint. And the great thing about the internet too, from a crime perspective, is there's no borders. And you could have people in Eastern Europe talking with people in South America and people in Asia, and all be part of the same group, and come to a common place online and plan their heist and steal money and launder it through many different places. So, we're really seeing that, as an emergence, is what I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a consumer's perspective as well, there's the idea that the one that really gets my imagination going is the idea that anonymity is going away. It's no longer just privacy, but that with facial recognition, you're instantly recognizable, and that all of that is being put together. And so when I hear you talk about the criminal element and how difficult it is to track down these cyber criminals, and the idea that when they cross jurisdictions, that's the nature of the internet, right? We're trying to use real-world laws and rules to track down criminals that are operating online. And I have to believe that as we evolve and as we all go online more and more and rely on this sort of digital persona, there's going to have to be a better way to protect that and a way to enforce it.
So, I guess go ahead. I just wanted to add something, but please. Can you press the button? There's.
So I have a virus package from Norton, and I'm doing email, and then I get a message when I try to go to a certain site, and it said, don't trust this site. This site tries to take personal information about people. And then last week I get an email, just a regular email, but I open it and there's a link there. And there's no message, there's no words, there's no ad. There's
Delete.
Say that again?
I'd say just to delete it. If you don't know who it's coming from, you've just got to get rid of it. Right.
Yeah, I personally, I don't, unless somebody calls me and says, I am sending you right now a link to this, and I still open it in a VM, I never click on a link unless you know exactly, what it is. They're just going to affect your computer, for sure.
So, actually, one thing that I wanted to just say before we move on to some questions, piggybacking on what Agent Murawski was saying, one thing that we see more and more, and you alluded to this at the in the very first thing that you said, some of the crime, of the traditional physical crime, now is moving online. We're not just talking about electronic crime. We are not just talking about people breaking into machines. We're talking about people stealing credit card numbers and selling them. Okay, they're doing that online, but if you think about it, it's just a different distribution channel. We see people selling drugs online. Again, it's basically, your friendly neighborhood street dealer who is moving online and selling stuff online. And actually, the one thing that is interesting in this, one of the reasons why we're interested in doing research on this, is that if you remember the 90s, what happened in the electronic commerce world, big entrants on the e-commerce scene, like Amazon.com, they were not people who owned bookstores. They were just new entrants that started this business and competed with traditional brick and mortar bookstores, eventually leading to the demise of some of them. I mean, if you work for Borders, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that we see more or less the same thing online. Those are not, I mean, it's not, you know, the Sicilian mafia, to take, you know, one of the cliches, that is actually doing that. These are people that were not necessarily career criminals, but just find a way of doing this online that is providing pretty good return on investment for some of them, for the gifted ones, and they become pretty good at it. So the question is, and I don't know the answer to that question, but what is the proportion of crimes that are going to be facilitated or committed completely online as opposed to in the physical world? Is it going to change over time? Is this something that we should fear, or is this something that actually is more of a mixed balance? Because on the one hand, you get lots of evidence. I mean, the internet doesn't forgive and it doesn't forget, right? So you get a lot of evidence trail when you're online. But at the same time, you've got jurisdiction issues, you've got, you know, technological challenges that you are facing. And yet another dimension to that is that when things go online, you tend, because you have this physical distance, you tend to remove a little bit, not necessarily completely, but a little bit the threat of violence. For instance, those guys who are selling drugs online, they will tell you, well, you know, it's much better than buying them on the street because at least I don't get shot. So all of these are, I'm not, you know, taking any sides here. What I'm saying is that this is the type of thought process we need to go through because we are really seeing a sea change in the way those things are happening.
1 second. Alan's going to ask one more question. We're going to open it up to the audience. But when you do ask a question, press the button here so that the microphones can pick up your voice. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Keith, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, I totally agree. I mean, when you think about society now, people, you know, probably everybody that's at least in college that's in this room, you've grown up with the internet your whole life, and you know the younger generation that you know, so they know their life with the internet. So the same with the criminals. So if you're going to go into a life of crime, you're going to use what you know, and you know, like we're seeing, you know, people selling drugs through Xbox and things like that. So the traditional drug squads and now they need to have a high technical skill set because you know, the criminals are utilizing, you know, the computers as well. So
That's what I wanted to ask you about. There's a case that's just coming about in New York involving a website called Silk Road, and that has been popularized and has popularized the use of bitcoins, which have now, of course, become a big buzzword. And my personal view is that bitcoins are just one more fabulous fraud, but I think it's clear that there is, as Andy said, no anonymity on the internet and no place to hide, or there is anonymity, but there's no privacy. And so maybe you guys could explain the difference, because I guess the whole Silk Road thing and the appeal of Bitcoin is that there may be anonymity. So I'd like everybody to talk about Bitcoin and similar cyber currencies and whether we should really welcome this or not.
So my point about anonymity, and then I'll hand it over to Nicholas, because he's really the expert on Silk Road and what was happening there. But the point about ironically, you might actually be more anonymous online these days than in the real world, right? I mean, your physical face is what you know, computers can now scan your image and, you know, learn everything about you. You know, compare your physical image with your Facebook profile, and then you know, piece it all together. I spoke earlier about the biometric devices, and in the process of working on that story, I came across a woman in the UK who, she keeps all of her information online. She posts everything out there, so you can see, you know, when she went to bed last night. I happened to look this morning. She went to bed at 12:34, and she woke up around 9 o'clock. She tends to sleep in on Monday mornings. She was up 2 times in the middle of the night last night. Okay. And the thing is, you know, I know this because she puts it all out there. But what's frightening in the real world scenario is that you could take her image as she's walking into a store, perhaps, and scan her image. I mean, we all know that as you walk into a store, they're going to take your photo, right? There's surveillance. But now they can take that photo and compare it, you know, do a scan and match it with your Facebook profile. And now they know all this information about you. And it's funny, you talk with some of the experts and they say it won't be long before they're able to create avatars that take your, you know, perhaps 2 of your best friends, merge their faces together, and now you've got a salesperson who's selling something to you that you like the person looks pleasing, you don't know exactly why. It's because your anonymity in the real world is gone. But online, through Tor, and that's where we'll get into the Silk Road discussion, there is, it appears to be anonymous, it appears to be secure. Experts in the room here tell me that it is completely secure, there's no back door. But at the same time, as Alan mentioned, Silk Road was broken into and the perpetrators behind it were arrested. So is it secure?
All right, so I'll let Agent Mularski talk about the law enforcement side of this.
I can't, I actually, it's an ongoing case, so I can't comment. So you talk all Silk Road, I can talk Bitcoin.
So I want to make a couple of points. The first one is that Bitcoin is actually the poster child for what I was saying earlier, that we have this sort of duality. For those of you who don't exactly know how it works, that's no problem. The idea is that you have this digital payment system, and you've got an entire ledger of all transactions that ever happened, ever on the network, that is available for everybody to see. Think about it. The entire book is available. You can see that Alice paid Bob, who paid Charlie sometime in 2008, and so forth. And this is what they're calling an anonymous currency? No. So the point is that it may be fairly hard to trace the transactions because you have to look at a very, very large and fairly complex graph. And also, you don't necessarily have a mapping between Nicholas Christine and account 1234567. But if Agent Mularski manages to get that mapping somehow because you get a subpoena of the place where I actually buy Bitcoins in exchange for dollars or things like that, then actually it facilitates your job because then you have the entire trail of everything that I've done. Now, when we're talking about Silk Road, we don't have all of the details of the investigation because, again, it's an ongoing case, but we do have an FBI complaint that we can work from that essentially tells us how they managed to find who the alleged person was behind it. And when you read that complaint, the most striking thing is that it looks like a collection of very traditional police techniques. You look for clues, you look for traces that the perpetrators have left online. You don't break into Tor or try to do any of that stuff because that's the most difficult thing. But you use typical policing techniques. I mean, apparently there were some people, I don't think it was in the New York complaint, I think it was in the Maryland complaint, which said that there were some confidential informants and some undercover agents that actually interacted with those people. This is exactly the same thing as what law enforcement has been doing offline, right? So the point is that when you're online, when you're committing crimes online, you're leaving a very rich trail of evidence, which is very helpful when you're going to get prosecuted. That's the way it is. On the other hand, the duality is that you're making it harder for people to find you in the first place. But when they find you, it doesn't look so good for you because you're going to have a very, very hard time explaining away all of this trail of evidence that you've left behind. Same thing with Bitcoin, as I just mentioned.
The thing about Bitcoin too is it is a digital currency. Digital currency has been around for quite some time. One of the PayPal. Everybody's probably used the PayPal. There are a number of other digital currencies that came out. eGold that came out. Liberty Reserve. There's Perfect Money that's out there now. Web Money. So there's many different types of digital currency that's out there, with Bitcoin being one of them. The thing about Bitcoin too, it gets a lot of press, but at the same time, from a criminal perspective, for the real serious criminals, it fluctuates too much. So how would you like to be a criminal that all of a sudden, got paid, $1,200 in Bitcoin, and now the next day it's only worth $400, or vice versa. So until Bitcoin stabilizes, the real serious criminals really aren't going to use it unless they're just trying to manipulate the price, which we've been seeing them do that as well.
So one of the interesting things actually about Silk Road is that Silk Road itself wasn't selling drugs per se. They were facilitating the sale of drugs. What they were selling were financial services like hedging and things like that, insurance on the price of Bitcoin. If I sell you an ounce of weed for, I don't know, I'm just making up numbers here, but 20 Bitcoins today, which is, well, that would be a very expensive ounce. But if I sell it for 1 Bitcoin, $500, and tomorrow the Bitcoin is worth 600, then great, I made money. But if I sell it for 500 and tomorrow the Bitcoin is worth 250, then I'm losing money. So the site actually had things like hedging, where you could purchase financial insurance and they would actually give you the amount corresponding to the amount of dollars you wanted to sell the product for in the first place. And in exchange for that, they would collect commissions, they would do essentially what eBay is doing, right? So that was their business model. And so what we do see is that some of those marketplaces actually provide services. If you think about it, just forget about the fact that drugs were being sold. What they were doing is essentially what eBay is doing, which is building some sort of infrastructure to essentially sell reputation, trust, and risk management. That's what they were doing. If that's all they had been doing, that would have been fine, except that the products that were being sold there actually were highly illegal pretty much everywhere.
Just one last, the final point in that too is if you go on tour now, if you had gone on 6 months ago before Silk Road was busted, it was an open marketplace. You could buy essentially anything on there. Whatever evil, devious thing you could think of was available for sale on tour. And since Silk Road was busted, it's all gone away. I mean, it's almost all gone away. It's gone underground. I'm sure the criminals are finding new avenues, and Agent Malarski's probably hot on their trail. But it's that was a win for the good guys for sure. If you go on there now, it's a completely different place.
We have a question from one of our web viewers, Mr. Tor. This is for Agent Malarski and Professor. What is the future of Android malware, and where do you see the direction of mobile security going?
Well, Android malware, it is exploding, especially if you go to the shops that aren't like Google Play. There's a lot of different marketplaces out there that you can buy applications that aren't vetted as well. Android obviously has the biggest market share, so again, the bad guys always go where the market share is. So the bigger the market share of Android, that you're going to see more malware in the Android market. But again, using common sense. Don't go to non-authorized programs that they don't vet. If you're utilizing and maybe you're going to a Chinese Google Play Store, chances are it's not authorized by Google. There's going to be more malicious programs there as well.
So I want to run a quick experiment. How many of you have Android phones in the room? Please raise your hand. Okay, so yes, they do have a dominant market share. How many of you have the latest version of the Android operating system on your phone? Are you sure? What's the latest version? So people who have Google phones basically have the latest version. People who don't, people who have phones that are subsidized by their telecom operator, typically do not have the latest version. Why? Because there's a conflicting set of incentives. Your mobile carrier wants you to buy a new phone pretty much as soon as your contract is up. So they are not going to bother updating the software because they have no interest in doing that. So there's a bunch of people in this room, I'm sure, that are walking around with Android 2.0 phones, 2.1, 2.2, maybe 2.3. Not that many people have Android 4, and those who do probably have like a version 2 kernels ago. So why is it a problem? Well, it is a problem because you've got a number of things called security patches that actually fix critical vulnerability that could allow people to get complete control over your phone. Sometimes the same type of stuff that we use to root our phones is the type of things that people use to actually get access to data that is that should be private. So the point is that we've got a big problem here in terms of incentives because there is currently no incentives for carriers to actually make sure that you have updated software. In fact, it's a counter incentive to them. And we haven't seen that much of a problem so far with that. We start seeing it a little bit, but it hasn't been completely exploited, but I think that this might be a very, very big problem in the years to come.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you have a Windows computer, Patch Tuesday comes and you're going to get patched, at least it's pushed out. But with the phones, it doesn't happen.
I hope you guys can see why this is such a great story for journalists, right? Listen to them. I freaked out like at least a half dozen times sitting up here listening to them. So.
Just push.
The button is below the light. No, just under it. repeat the question.
What really did Snowden really offer? I don't know what's new that he says he discovered and reports.
Well, government spy on other people, that's not particularly new. I think that what was primarily evidence is that the scale of information that was collected was much bigger than most people were thinking. But people tend to be also a little bit schizophrenic in the sense that they don't necessarily... We know that, oh yeah, Facebook is collecting a lot of data on us, you know, those neat little like buttons that we see on those web pages. They're not here to just look pretty. They are actually collecting data on you, even if you don't click on them. So people, I think, have this, you know, kind of subconsciously think, okay, yeah, this is happening. But what happened with the Snowden revelations is that it was, you know, there were slides and things like that that were shown to actually show the type of techniques that are being used and make people realize that, yes, data is being collected as, you know, basically a general, it's a general strategy of collecting as much data as you can. And, you know, in that respect, I think that it was more of a awareness moment rather than, oh, we didn't know that they were doing that. It's more like, well, we knew it was probably possible, but we didn't realize that it was to that extent. From the, I would say the research community, one thing that was a little bit surprising to us was that some of the techniques that were used are actually really, really offensive in terms of, you know, offensive as in attacking. And we didn't necessarily think that that type of stuff was going on, and now we do.
Right, I agree with that. I mean, if you go back to the Simpsons movie, which is 4, 5, 6 years old, right? I mean, it's pop culture, and there's a great scene in there where they're riding along on the train, and the Simpsons say something, and say, "Oh, nobody will ever hear," and then they show the NSA, and they're listening into what was going on, right? So it was sort of in pop culture already that we had the sense that the government was watching, but undeniably, what has happened over the last year with the Snowden affair is that the public is much more aware of the extent of the surveillance, and whether you agree with him or not, whether you think he's a patriot or a traitor, you can't deny that it fueled a public discussion that has made us all much more aware of what we say and do online and on our phones.
All right, let me answer the question slightly differently and cite 3 titles of newspaper articles from 2006 to 2010. This is many years before Snowden. Article, USA Today, May 11, 2006. Title, NSA has massive database of Americans' phone calls. This is 2006. It looks like we are not reading the press. Title, New York Times, John Markov, of course, February 25th, 2006, taking spying to a higher level. Agencies look for more ways to mine data. NSA has obtained from AT&T database 1.92 trillion call records. We are not talking about millions or hundreds of millions or billions. We are talking about trillions. This was in 2006. And another one, Washington Post, January 19th, 2010, title, FBI broke law for years in 4 record searches. Now, it turns out that one interesting thing about NSA is that they told the court where they in fact broke the law, at least according to the Presidential Commission. So they voluntarily went to the court and said, look, we broke the law, we did this, that, and the other, and presumably that stopped. The FBI did the second best thing. Instead of going to the Department of Justice, they leaked the information to the press. This is a good old deep throat tradition. So it turns out that there is some degree of accountability, not just for the NSA, but also for the FBI. I think that the more concerning question is whether the CIA learned how to leak. And the evidence so far is that they have not. And I think that the more interesting story that's going to come up is the story about Senator Dianne Feinstein's computers, were they searched by the CIA illegally or not? That, to me, it's a huge story that perhaps our colleagues from the press will be able to shed some light on.
Right. I mean, the real question of everything you said is, are people reading the newspaper? You've got to start reading the newspaper. That's preferably the Tribune Review, right? So, I've got kids to
Great
feed.
answer,
You know,
Andy.
I've got.
Yes.
Sure. So if you look at security as an offense and defense, hackers are the offense, and the defense is everybody else. So looks like the offense has been really intensified in the last few years in the sophistication of tools and how easy you can buy these in the underground, the software for a fraction of the cost in terms of your return on investment. So I just want to address it. How is the underground landscape, evolved in the last 2 years, and how is it the acceleration of the sophistication of the tools, and where do we stand a chance,
Well, one of the things, if you go back 10 years, usually you had a hacker and they had a skill set to get in and all that. Everything's automated now, so that same hacker now makes the exploit kit and sells it to everybody. So you really don't have to have a lot of very good technical skills. You need to know how to set up a server, maybe, but you could pay somebody to do that. You could pay somebody to really do every service that you want. I could go in and actually, Andrew, with just knowing computers, but not maybe knowing how to hack, he can get on a forum and say, okay, I want to infect 10,000 computers. So what do I need? Okay, I need a spammer. So he's going to pay a spammer, somebody. Now he needs an executable, so he'll get somebody who writes the executable to give it to the spammer to spam. He may get somebody with an exploit kit to help penetrate. He doesn't need to know how to do that, but he needs to know how to leverage people because everything is automated. And I think that's the biggest difference from 10, 15 years ago. You don't need to be very technical now to be able to conduct these hacks.
I didn't do it, Agent Malarski.
So just to build up on that, I think that it's a great explanation, and just to build up on that, what we do see is more and more commoditization, and essentially it's becoming a service industry. Okay, so you don't need that many people to actually have hardcore technical skills. You just need to have those people being willing to sell those skills for rent for other people who then deploy these attacks to larger numbers, and then those attacks are being used by other people to send spam or to do other things, and then those people that are perhaps advertising websites are then used by people who sell pharmaceutical goods or things like that. So you've got an ecosystem that used to be very, very simple. Essentially, there was a bad guy and there was a good guy, and the bad guy was attacking the good guy. Now it doesn't work like that anymore. You've got bad guys that are essentially entire supply chains, if you will. And that's the main thing that we've seen changing, I would say, since 2004 or so. It's evolved in the past 10 years. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily scarier or anything like that. It's just the environment is changing and we have to adapt. That's what we're doing.
Behind you.
It's many of you have spoke earlier about how, as a people, we are sacrificing our security for convenience. One example is technology advancement in embedded systems like our cars and biometric systems. Do you think there's a way to be more proactive about our security, specifically in those systems, and that are advancing, that are not covering themselves before they even release the system?
It's quite hard to answer. I think that at a very high level, what we do see is that the amount of software on which we rely, the number of lines of code that actually are written to support functions that were traditionally done by other things, like mechanical actuators or hydraulic actuators. A lot of this is piloted by software now. And it's mathematical. The more lines of code you have, the higher the probability that one of those lines has some sort of vulnerability somewhere that could be potentially exploited. I think that comes with the territory to some extent. Now, to go back to maybe what we were saying earlier in terms of protection of privacy, there's also, and this is something that has been happening for the past 10, 12 years, more and more privacy-preserving technologies that we can use. So it goes both ways, right? I mean, we've got software that is increasingly complex and that is potentially increasingly vulnerable on the one hand. On the other hand, it's not like people like myself and colleagues that are working in security do absolutely nothing. There's better ways of verifying software than there was before. Things are improving, and also you've got technology that actually makes you more secure in some respect. Again, the environment is changing, not necessarily for worse, not necessarily for better, it's just changing.
You were talking earlier about the essentially rent-a-hacker that we have today that makes it easier for people to go out and just pay a hacker to exploit whatever they're looking to attack. And I could see that over the past 10 or 15 years, but if you go back 20 years, these zero-day exploits weren't for sale, they were freely available. They were released as research until essentially that was shut down by a series of lawsuits. Do you think that the increase today is because of the increase in the internet use, or do you think that the increase is actually because you can rent a hacker? Because 20 years ago, we had script kiddies, where you didn't really need technical skill. You just went and downloaded a script that somebody else wrote, and it was released as a point of proof of concept. So really, anybody could have went out and done that 20 years ago. Today, those exploits are $20,000 a piece.
Well, I think a lot has changed in that time with how the internet changed with the commercialization of it. 20 years ago, we didn't have all the stores and the shopping online. We didn't do our banking online, like we do now. And I think, we've seen the guys say, well, hey, I can make money off of this now. Whereas back before, there was really no money in it. Because there was really no, industry on the internet at that time. You could read news groups and things like that. You couldn't get access to, millions of dollars. So I think it's just things have changed, and as a result of that, that's why we're seeing that more. Why release it to the public for free when you could sell it on the black market for tens of thousands of dollars, or even actually sell it back to the company? Google, Facebook, they have bounty programs and things like that. So it's all about the money right now, and that's people want to make the money.
Yeah, the short answer is that there was no demand for it 25 years ago. So there's no demand, you cannot sell it, right? I mean, if no one wants your product, you're not going to sell it. Now there is a demand, both from, rent-a-hacker types, companies themselves, and let's face it, also governmental organizations, government agencies, either for defensive purposes or potentially also for offensive purposes. So you've got an ecosystem where there is competition, where there is relatively scarce supply of really good 0 days. For instance, if you manage to get a 0 day for, say, Google Chrome or Apple Safari, you can make a pretty good living out of it. I mean, you can sell those things for the price of a nice house. So again, it's economy driven. That's the short answer to your question.
I mean, the other point I would make from a lay perspective is that it's such a target-rich environment too. I mean, that's the other thing this is what we've talked about all evening here, is that we think about, for every one of us, how much we do online now and how much of our lives are online and our shopping. If there's anything, you take some comfort in being just one among millions, right? I mean, one among billions. I mean, that's the only comfort we can take out of this whole thing, is that, unless you have something, like they said before, unless you're a major target, they're not going to come after you. But at the same time, to get to your point of, why is it happening more now? The opportunity is there.
Yes.
If you were to look at nation states, what would you rank as the top 3 or 5 in level of sophistication?
That I can't comment on, so I'll give that to other people. I can't comment on that.
It's just guesswork, honestly. I mean, the best one, the best ones, you don't necessarily know exactly what their capabilities are, because if you know exactly what the capabilities are, that means that they are leaking secrets and that they are disclosed. But I would put it somewhat diplomatically by saying, just look around you at a university like Carnegie Mellon, who are the students, and you get a somewhat representative population, same thing.
They have a group here on campus called the Plaid Parliament of Poning. They're, poning is like owning, and they play capture the flag. And these guys are tops in the world. They're the year before last they were number one, and then they're always in the top 2 or 3 teams in the world. But when I went and interviewed them, they made the point that the Chinese don't have a team, the Israelis don't have a team, the Iranians don't have a team. So, that gives you some indication of who's out there.
Nation states.
And that's what I'm talking about, nation states. So you're talking about,
students capture the flag.
no, to the point being that those nation states, no, it's the same point. The point is that the students from those nations are also operating at a very high level, and they're not competing and capture the flag because they don't want to give away the skills that they have. They don't want to tip their hand and say, here's what we're able to do. I was at Congress this year when, it was Mike Rogers, one of the top congressmen on the issue of the bank attacks and, who's attacking the banks. This has been going on for, a year and a half. PNC Bank was one of the victims. He said, I'm 99% sure it was the Iranians in that case. I mean, we all have seen the stories over the past year about what the Chinese were able to accomplish. And there's no question, if you look at what the United States is doing, right? I mean, to get back to Stuxnet again, who created Stuxnet? Who put it out there? I mean, the best guess is that it was the United States and the Israelis, perhaps together, perhaps independently, who knows?
So let me just follow that up. I didn't really hear you say the United States is tops. I really heard you say that these other nations are tops. So my question would be, technically, are we up to the challenges that may be coming at us from whatever source as a nation state?
Clearly, I just said the United States is tops. I said, who created Stuxnet? The best guess is that it was the United States behind it, right? I mean, who? Now the only fear is that now that the secret's out, now somebody knows how to do it. They're going to turn it back on us. That's the fear here.
Hold on. I guess you have it.
So to follow up on it, typically it's very difficult to say who the best is. But there are 3 or 4 countries which are clearly at the top, and clearly one of them is the United States. Another one is the United Kingdom. Another one is Russia. Another one is China, and the other one would be Israel. Now, out of those countries, up until recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, the best agencies were military intelligence agencies. But things have changed in some countries like Russia, for example, where now the new FSB follow-on to the KGB has gotten extremely sophisticated, much more than perhaps the military intelligence in Russia. But those are exactly the nation states who were among the top in espionage. And in active measures, and in chemical laboratories, and the like. They are now very good in cyber espionage, cyber operations, and I don't think that there is any doubt that those are the top 5.
The other point is that when does it become a nation state? I mean, if you look at the attacks on the banks, it was a group that took credit was the Al-Qassam cyber fighters. Now, who
That's
who
a
is
little
that?
different, though.
Those were peanut attacks. Those were child play.
Yeah, those are a
Of
little
course
different.
they were an initial attack, but were they carried out by the nation state or were they
Oh, no,
carried
no.
out by a
No.
group of?
No, so the PNC stuff, that was basically Syrian Liberation Army, which despite its name, its grandiose name, has nothing of a nation-state actor. It's basically a bunch of, it's a little bit like Anonymous in other parts of the world. It's a bunch of hacktivists that are considering themselves digital freedom fighters, and most of what they did was essentially run fairly well-known denial of service attacks that are not very difficult to carry out. They are hard to defend against, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily very hard to carry out.
And with state sponsorship behind it, or not? I
Probably
mean, who's
not.
to say? Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, these people have other things to do right now, honestly.
Yes.
Targets, mostly target, no pun intended, being the big target. Do you anticipate at some point in time in the future, if these hackers are going after the big banks and the Walmarts and things like that, that we foresee a day when it's not safe to use a credit card online, that so much financial damage has been accumulated, the companies actually say we can no longer offer these services, or we're losing too much money. And
I don't think we'll ever see that. The big thing is, first off, with consumer banking, you from a customer standpoint, you're very secure. If you read any of your terms of service, all the banks will reimburse you as soon as you see that, any kind of a charge. So from that standpoint, you're going to be fine. The thing is, think about from the cost of doing business, how much money the corporations are saving by doing stuff online as opposed to having a brick and mortar, of paying people to man the stores, the work, to pay the health benefits and all that. So even if there is a loss from cybercrime, they're saving money from the cost of doing business online. So until the cost of doing business online would exceed the cost of doing business in a store, we're not going to have a problem on that. And will we see that in the future? I don't know, because it's just with automation, it makes things so less expensive. So that would be my answer on that.
I agree. I mean, the thing that was so eye-opening to me was how much money is being lost, that retailers and banks in particular are losing millions, perhaps billions of dollars, and yet it's just the cost of doing business at this point.
And just to give you like a quick example, if a bank says, hey, if we close these brick and mortars and we save $100 million, and you budget for a loss for cybercrime, let's say $30 million. You still have a net profit of $70 million, and unless it goes over what you budgeted, you don't have a problem. So that's kind of how the people would look at it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the cost of doing business online, even with horrible security problems, is still not enough to actually dwarf the benefits that you get from moving online.
So, as sort of a follow-on to that, how does that play in with the revelation that the NSA was actively attacking and weakening public security standards online?
Well, I think it's fair to say that there's a number of people in the cryptography community that were not quite pleased with that. I think that a number of people that have been fairly vocal about it, saying, there was a lot of distrust and perhaps a little bit of, I wouldn't say animosity, but distrust in the early 90s when things like the Clipper chip were proposed. That had thawed, and that was basically, there was a very good working relationship. And at least for some people in that community, I'm not saying that I'm one of them, but some people of that community have, again, a little bit of jittery feelings in terms of information sharing with those agencies. Because, well, there is, for some people, some trust relationship was somewhat broken. It's fine to spy on people, but, the standards type of thing, that's getting really dodgy. And so I know that everybody knows that there's a number of people that have serious problems with that, yeah.
We have time for one more question.
So maybe you can sum it up, so if you look at the economic model, right, cyber, so someone is gaining, someone is losing, right? So it's almost like two ways you can go. Cyber insurance as part of cost of doing business, and so you absorb the cost and pass the expenses back to the consumers. And the other model is it's a defense strategy. So more big government gets involved, with risk frameworks and cybersecurity control networks. So how do you see, both angles, big government getting into the consumer affairs and cost of doing the business, who is going to sustain this cost, and is it a viable model, moving forward,
It's an interesting question. You're talking about data and systems that are extremely complex and very big. And forgive me if I'm trying to summarize your sentence very crudely, but you're asking me if the US government or the European Union can actually legislate their way out of this. And I don't think so, because those systems are so complex already that coming up with rules and things like that, they're going to be broken anyway. However, so I think that, you know, the dynamics of the markets and essentially economics driven, essentially, right? So if you make profit, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about security, and if the consumers demand security, then you will implement it. If they don't, then sorry, but you don't care about it. That's probably what's going to be driving it. Now, should there be some sort of liability framework and things like that in place to avoid, you know, purely market-based solutions to converge to something that is not necessarily desirable? Perhaps, but a complete takeover or complete control, no. I mean, it's just infeasible from a technological standpoint.
Okay. Thank you very much.